Thank you very much, John. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your attendance. It's a pleasure for me to be back in Monterey. I've been here, I think, 7 or 8 years ago. So it's been a long time because of the pandemic. We couldn't move anywhere. And it's a pleasure to be back. And I'm going to talk today about the future, more of the future rather than the past achievements of the organization. As Jean said, I completed my second term at the OPCW in July 2018, and since then, I've been, relatively active in contributing to the work of some think tanks, civil society organizations. I wrote some articles about the Chemical Weapons Convention of PCW, as well as on the BWC. Because of the pandemic, I thought that my experience at the OPCW could have been useful. So I drew some, parallels between the BWC and the OPCW work. I proposed, in fact, some, rapid response mechanisms which could deal with the pandemics at a very early stage. And the Council on Strategic Risks in Washington published a few articles of mine on the subject. Anyhow, I keep my interest in the OPCW. It's very dear to me after 8 years, and it was quite an active period, especially because of the Syria file. As John again mentioned, we received the Nobel Peace Prize in 2013. It was a great privilege for me and an honor to receive it on behalf of the organization. I was accompanied by several ambassadors from The Hague on this occasion in Oslo. And this was, very timely actually for the organization because many of our experts were about to go to Syria for a very challenging mission, I must say. And they had to stay and work in very remote areas of Syria in very, dangerous situation because there was already a conflict which was unfolding at that time. Anyhow, the administration in Syria went quite successfully. In less than a year, actually, all declared chemical weapons, I emphasize this, by Syria were taken abroad and, and destroyed in very specialized facilities. But the challenge continued because of the reports of uses of chemical weapons in different parts of Syria, which I'll come back in a moment. The OPCW has been successful. It was able to adapt itself to new circumstances and also creative, I should say. But this was mainly thanks to the support of member states on these challenging times, and as well as the dedication and professionalism of the staff at the technical secretariat. When I arrived at the OPCW in July 2010, there was an ongoing debate about the deadline for the destruction of stockpiles of chemical weapons. It had become clear then that neither Russia nor the US, as the main possessor states, that they would not be able to meet the agreed deadlines. Another debate, but rather a latent one, was about the future of the organization. Some countries were thinking that the OPCW, as it stood, would become redundant soon. After all, declared chemical weapon stocks would be destroyed. A much smaller organization or a structure similar to the EWC Implementation Support Unit in Geneva, ISU, would be sufficient in their view. In November the same year, in 2010, I called on Ambassador of ECOWAS from Sweden, and we put together an advisory group of 15 people, many of whom already worked on CW matters. And the group met 3 times in The Hague and prepared its report by July 2011. The report concluded that the OPCW should continue to exist as a global repository of knowledge and expertise in the field of chemical weapons and contribute to international peace and security by preventing the re-emergence of these weapons. It should be fully equipped to fulfill this mission. I shared the report with member states. I organized a series of informal brainstorming meetings, retreats with the representatives of state parties, and encouraged them to share their views on the future of the organization. A broad consensus then emerged among state parties. They seem to agree that the organization should be maintained as such, at least for the near to medium term. The involvement of the OPCW in Syria later on had, of course, strengthened this view. First, the support for the UN Secretary General's mechanism to investigate the use of chemical and biological weapons in Ghouta in August 2013, then the OPCW UN Joint Mission for the Elimination of Syrian Chemical Weapons Program, later the establishment of the OPCW Fact-Finding Mission and Declaration Assessment Team, and finally, the Investigation and Identification Team, IIT, have all been successfully carried out. We stretched the CWC a little and invented some new mechanisms such as the FFM, Fact-Finding Mission, but all were within the object and purpose of the Convention. The OPCW Secretariat fulfilled all these missions with a high degree of professionalism, impartiality, and objectivity. If there is now a stalemate on declaration-related issues, it's due to the position taken by the Syrian government, which Russia and a few other countries support. Unfortunately, Syria does not seem to care much about the consequences of its attitude, and some decisions were made, but they seem to be not moving in the right direction. The state parties demonstrated remarkable resolve and determination by adopting the decision on addressing the threat from CWUs in June 2018 at the 4th special session of the Conference of States Parties. The establishment of the IIT was a bold step in the history of the CWC regime. It's now equipped with a significant deterrent, particularly with the universal coverage of the IIT mechanism, deriving from paragraph 19 of the June decision. Nevertheless, the identification of those who ordered or used the chemical weapons will not be sufficient. They must be held accountable, prosecuted, and punished. The fact that some national courts are prosecuting Syrian officials who committed war crimes is a welcome development. As you know, the International Criminal Court cannot be seized because they need a mandate from the Security Council, which will not happen. And Syria is not a party to the Rome Statute, which is the founding legal instrument of the ICC. And there is no other international, tribunal court which can be actually tasked for that. Therefore, it will be up to the national courts, to address those issues. And I was pleased to hear recently that some German courts, in fact, are addressing them. The polarization at the OPCW, which emerged following the military involvement of Russia in Syria in 2015, is likely to continue. It may even get worse due to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We don't know how long this war will go on and what will happen in its aftermath, whether a new Cold War will surface or not. a great deal of uncertainty exists at this stage. The member countries and other stakeholders who value the Chemical Weapons Convention regime should make an extra effort to preserve its credibility and integrity. This requires a coordinated and cohesive stand against the Russian-led campaign to discredit the work of the Secretariat in Syria. In particular, the third countries, which waver between the two camps, should be persuaded that it would be in their interest to keep this institution intact. Veiled threats by some state parties that they would leave the organization didn't materialize, and I don't think that will happen in the foreseeable future. The destruction of existing stockpiles of chemical weapons will be completed in 2023 when the US will finish its standardization program. I won't enter into the details of the delays, which were mainly due to technical reasons and to the concerns of the local peoples which needed to be addressed. The OPCW will focus in the future on the prevention of the re-emergence of chemical weapons. At present, the work in Syria will continue, and I hope that this dossier will be satisfactorily concluded. In addition to that, I have identified a few priorities for the future of the organization. First, the routine verification, this covers, in fact, the declared chemical industrial facilities. I believe that the verification of these plants under Article 6 of the Convention could be approached from a different angle and be adapted to counter new threats. For instance, the access of non-state actors to dual-use chemical products remains as a potential security risk, and measures must be taken to prevent it. Certainly, it is the responsibility of state parties to ensure the control of production and supply chains of such material. Nevertheless, the OPCW could develop, in cooperation with the global chemical industry, some standards to be implemented by the industry and include this issue under the Article 6 verification regime. Second is the universality of the convention. As Jean mentioned, we have already 193 states, parties, which is quite significant, but there are still 4 countries that are not party to the convention. Recent developments in the Middle East may be perhaps conducive to a breakthrough for the membership of Israel and Egypt. And I don't believe that this is going to happen in the context of the WMD free zone in the Middle East, which is unlikely to be realized in the foreseeable future. Therefore, we should develop some incentives for Egypt and Israel to encourage them to join the convention without delay. North Korea, which is suspected to possess large stocks of chemical weapons, is a very specific case. I don't think that we have a chance to succeed in the near future in persuading the North Korean leadership to change its position unless some unexpected developments unfold. But at some stage, the OPCW will have to assume the task of coordinating the elimination of the North Korean chemical weapons program. South Sudan will probably join the convention when the country will be stabilized. The third point is about the national implementation. A significant number of state parties have not yet developed necessary legislation to enforce the CWC at national level. This situation must be remedied. The efforts of the Secretariat hitherto were not adequate. Bilateral aid programs by the European Union or Western countries might be a more effective channel to improve the situation. Without getting into conditionality, suggestions accompanied with technical support and development support might produce tangible results. Implementation loopholes, which exist in different countries or regions, will continue to pose threats to the rest of the world. The fourth one is about international cooperation. There's a special department in the Secretariat which deals with the implementation of Article 10 of the Convention. which is international cooperation. This unit coordinates the capacity building activities, among them training programs, fellowships for the peaceful use of chemistry, and so on. I recognize that the OPCW is not a development agency, and its focus should continue to be the prevention of use of chemical weapons. However, in order to ensure an effective regime of prevention and response, we need the engagement of all state parties and their full implementation of the convention. Countries which have no chemical weapons, nor any declarable chemical plant, would not see the implementation of the convention as a priority. Therefore, it's in the interest of all to allocate more resources to cooperation activities which are perceived as main incentives by a large number of countries for their closer engagement in the CWC regime. This may be considered somehow as the soft power of the OPCW. The fifth one is on the chemical weapon use by non-state actors or terrorists. There is no mention of such a threat in the Chemical Weapons Convention. It was not a priority when the convention was negotiated in the 80s and early 90s. Nevertheless, there is general agreement among member countries that the OPCW should contribute to the international efforts to counter the chemical terrorist threat. Indeed, in addition to the work of the open-ended working group on terrorism, countering chemical terrorism has become a standing agenda item of the Executive Council, which provides the opportunity to exchange views and share best practices. I believe that the cooperation begun with other relevant institutions, which might be interrupted due to the pandemic, should be deepened. The UN Security Council 1540 Committee, Interpol, Europol, World Customs Organization are relevant authorities or institutions that the OPCW should continue to work. Relevant national authorities should also share their knowledge and expertise with other state parties. The OPCW Secretariat should continue to offer capacity building support to countries which are interested. A few counterterrorism experts may be hired and employed as instructors by the Technical Secretariat. Prevention and response go hand in hand. The Rapid Response Assistance Mission, RRM, is a useful mechanism for response. The team members are employed as instructors to train national experts in peacetime. These efforts could be stepped up. In terms of strengthening the capabilities of the OPCW, the construction of the ChemTech Center, which is underway, is a major step forward. I'm particularly pleased that a large number of state parties have contributed to the special fund for that purpose. The special fund has now reached, I understand, 35 million euros. This shows the strong sense of ownership by the membership. I believe that the center, which will become operational next year, will significantly enhance the ability of the OPCW to provide training to relevant national authorities, national experts. Another issue, which may appear as administrative at first glance, is closely related to the technical capabilities of the Secretariat, the tenure policy. I believe that Director General must be authorized to extend the tenure of sub-staff, which is limited to 7 years, up to a certain percentage, as it happens to be in some other organizations. We saw the advantage of having experienced staff during the OPCW and joint mission in Syria. We had inspectors who were about to be tenured, but we were allowed to keep them for a longer period because of the prospect of sharp reduction in the verification of destruction of chemical weapons. Since it wouldn't make sense to hire new inspectors, we were authorized to extend the contracts for another few years of existing ones. This helped us in Syria. I know that tenured inspectors may now be rehired after a recess, but I'm not sure that this is an ideal solution. Finally, the partnership between the OPCW and the chemical industry, academia, the scientific community, chemical societies, and other relevant civil society organizations should be further developed. I believe that there is a greater potential in this domain, which is mutually beneficial. States parties should continue to support such cooperation schemes. Jean, I will stop here, and I thank you for your attention, but I'm prepared to take questions and try to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador, especially given this. Thank you, especially highlighting those priorities that I think stimulated already a number of questions from several of us. I can start off with several questions, but I'm going to open the floor and invite colleagues and students who are here to address the ambassador by please identify yourself. Those online, please speak up and then ask a brief question. And then I will take, depending on the number of questions, I'll take 2 or 3 questions and then allow the ambassador to respond through the second round. Right, Michael.
Hello, I'm Michael Dutzman. I'm a research associate here at CNS. My understanding is that neutral laboratories are an important part of the OPCW's work. If Sweden joins NATO, will it still be seen as neutral? And if not, what effect will that have on the OPCW's work?
Yeah, sure. One more.
Is there another question at the stage? Yes.
Hello, my name is Galina Salnikova. I am a graduate research assistant here, and my question is a little more like comprehensive. After what happened in Syria and like what is happening in Syria, and in general with this like reduction of chemical weapons in the world, could you a little bit elaborate on like maybe public view of OPCW? Like how do you deal with like general audience, like raising awareness? Is there like negative or positive vision of the work of organization in general?
Okay, I couldn't get the second question well. So you are asking about the public perception?
Yeah, like public perception of the work of OPCW and the danger of like chemical weapons.
All right.
All right, let's go with those 2 questions to start with, Ambassador.
All right. The OPCW has actually a network of certified laboratories, designated laboratories, which are located in several member states. And the task of these laboratories, in fact, is to analyze the samples to be sent by the OPCW. And we had to do it several times. When samples were collected in Syria, they were sent to different designated labs. And the procedure is as follows. There are, when samples arrive at the main laboratory in The Hague of the OPCW, they are split in 4 sets, and 2 sets are sent to 2 different designated labs. And when we receive the results, if they corroborate each other, so it's considered as final. If there was a conflict, then another set would be sent to a 3rd laboratory, which didn't happen so far. So fortunately, the labs were, very capable ones, experts, and the results have all the time corroborated each other, and they were considered as final. And in Syria, during our experience in Syria, actually, I think there are, at that time, there were 23 laboratories. The labs in some countries didn't want to receive, those samples for political reasons, and they didn't want to get involved in Syrian matters, and therefore we had to use mostly Western, actually labs located in Western countries. So whether they are members of NATO or not, it didn't make any difference from our point of view, because they are again designated labs which went through several proficiency tests, and they are repeated regularly, and they are considered as authoritative. Therefore, the fact that Sweden will join NATO in the near future will not change, in fact, the status of this laboratory in Stockholm. and it will be part of the network of designated labs as happens to be in other cases. And I should say that I encouraged, in fact, other countries to to use their designated labs in Asia or elsewhere to work more closely with the OPCW, because we need to diversify this network. There is no laboratory at all, for instance, in Latin America, designated lab. So I think it should happen. And there was one in South Africa. I don't know whether it's still part of the network, but no other lab is designated from Africa. Actually, there could be from from the Maghreb region. This requires a lot of expertise, but it's feasible because the OPCW is providing, in fact, training programs, and with the Chemtech Center, which is going to be operational, as I said earlier, next year. I think these training programs will be more comprehensive and frequent. As to the public perception and so on, chemical weapons are considered, of course, weapons of the past, and one of the reasons I believe that the international community got together to get rid of those weapons was mainly, due to the fact that they have become, I believe, less actually decisive in the warfare because there are several, means to protect the soldiers in the battlefield against the chemical weapons. So there are new weapons which are more effective. So that was one of the reasons. And secondly, from a humanitarian point of view, it's not, it indiscriminately affects the civilians as well. So the civil society was quite active, in fact, opposing to the use of such weapons. They were used extensively during the First World War, especially in 1915, 16, and 17. First chlorine, then phosgene, then sulfur mustard, first by Germany, but also by later on by other belligerent parties during the First World War. Later on, they were manufactured in large quantities between the two wars, but they were not used during the Second World War. No one really knows why they were not used. There were several separate speculations why, for instance, Hitler didn't want to use chemical weapons. One of the speculations is that because he was affected personally by the chemical weapons during the First World War as a soldier, and he didn't like it, and he thought that it should be used again. But we don't know whether this was the reason. At some stage, I guess the UK, especially Churchill, thought that they should be used to end the war as early as possible. But his military people did not object to it. Anyhow, it was good that they were not used. 71,000 metric tons of chemical weapons were declared to the OPCW when it was created in 1997, and out of which 29,000 plus by the United States, close to 40,000, 39 or so by Russia, which it has inherited from the Soviet Union. And I visited many of the storage sites, both in Russia as well as in the United States. And these were really, very deadly weapons, all kinds of them, missiles, artillery shells, mortars, and so on, and filled with, nerve agents and others. And if they were used, they could have killed millions of people in different parts of the world. Therefore, the humanity is lucky that the leaders during the war finally didn't want to use those stockpiles. But since they didn't know actually that they would be destroyed at some stage, they didn't know how to do it because these were very complicated technically from a technical point of view. So they had to develop some new technologies both in the US and Russia, and to find out to destroy them in a very safe manner from a human point of view, but also from an environmental point of view. So the convention was very strict. No, human damage, nor environmental damage should happen during the destruction activities. And the destruction activities were huge. Hundreds of people worked in each of them. They were built next to the storage sites, again for safety reasons. So with very little transportation from the storage to the destruction facility. And the OPCW inspectors were permanently present during the destruction activities. So to monitor and inspect, in fact, that everything was done according to the convention criteria. So the chemical weapons from a public point of view were weapons, again, for those who know a little more about the First World War experience, which is also considered as a war of gas. There are several paintings, stories written about that. And if you go one day to Belgium, a place called Ypres, where close to it, trench war did take place. There's a very a good museum actually, where they display different, weapons which were used there, and they tell the stories of the use of chemical weapons. And this was found atrocious, by many. And now the chemical weapons were used in Syria. I think there is a renewed awareness about its use. Different ones, chlorine, sarin, sulfur mustard by ISIS were used. And the people have become, concerned again, I suppose. And there is a renewed, opposition to the reemergence of those such weapons. Unfortunately, the divisions within the membership do undermine, this public perception. Especially the Russian campaign to discredit the work of the OPCW as well as the UN in terms of investigation of allegations of use. Does create some confusion among the member states, especially third parties, as I would call them, as well as the public. And there are several stories which are invented, which are nonsense to those who follow developments closely, but nevertheless, they affect the public perception. Anyhow, I believe that the Chemical Weapons Convention, the taboo against chemical weapons, is still very strong. No one actually did challenge this taboo openly, and every use of CW, whether in Syria, later in the UK, or in Malaysia, and in Russia against Navalny, were denied. So no one says, "Oh, I don't care about the CWC, so I use whatever I want." So no one said that. So that's but still those who are responsible must be punished, because according to criminal lawyers, only if potential criminals are certain that they would be tried and punished, prosecuted one day, that they would be deterred to change their mind not to commit such crimes. We need to set these examples in the case of the use of chemical weapons. Otherwise, the credibility and the integrity of the CWC chemical regime might be undermined.
Thank you. Yes, please.
My name is Debbie Kay. I'm also a graduate student here at Preez. You mentioned politicization of the organization, and especially regarding the third or neutral states, and the necessity for these states to stay neutral. I wonder, because I draw parallels with the NPT regime, I wonder if there are any groups of states within the OPCW among the third or neutral states which can push agenda or which can join any interested or politicized state within the OPCW.
Actually, in terms of groupings within the OPCW, these are the same groupings as at the UN. Geographical groups, so Western European and Western and others group, and Asian group, Latin American GRULAC, the non-aligned states is also a group, but which it does not act, as actively as that was elsewhere, I suppose. When I said, if I said neutral, I don't know whether I said it, but there are countries, I said, which waver between, the Western-led countries, which believe that Syrian government used chemical weapons in Syria, and they are responsible of that, and they should be prosecuted and so on. And there's another group led by Russia, Iran, and Syria, which is very limited in terms of number. And they believe that these are staged, events and acts, and they are unfounded, and what the OPCW has done so far was not robust, solid, technically, and so on. And then there's quite a large group between the two camps, which waver, so which don't want to take sides. Maybe they have their own opinion, but they don't want to show it. So that's how it is. And that's why I believe that they should be, further lobbied and own the regime more closely than before, for the sake of the integrity of the regime.
So, Ambassador, if I'm going to ask a two-part question that are related. Firstly, you did mention also the priority for the organization to look at the use of chemical weapons by non-state actors. And I'd like to get your feedback on the role of the organization, in particular, given the incident of the use of Novichok by Russian agents. And you mentioned the stalemate in the ICC and the Security Council to actually deal with such individuals. So, what could the OPCW's role be in this? And related to that, of course, the stalemate that resulted from the Novichok case between Russia and the EU, and further exaggerated by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Do you foresee a situation, given Russia's deliberate attempts to discredit the organization, where Russia could withdraw from the OPCW? And what would be the potential consequences of that?
And the first, incident which took place in Salisbury against Yuri Skripal and his daughter, actually one British citizen was killed, by accident later on. We sent a team of the OPCW experts to carry out an independent investigation. So I proposed to the British authorities to do it, and it was within the convention to provide such a technical assistance. At the first instance, they were hesitant because their national legislation didn't allow it. And in the end, a court took a decision, and they were able to invite a team of experts. All this was done very quickly. The British authorities did announce their finding by that time, but the OPCW team went to the site and collected samples themselves, and these were brought back by the experts to the OPCW lab. And as I said earlier, they were split in 4 sets and sent to different designated labs. In the end, the findings of the British authorities were confirmed about Novichok. In the case of Navalny, when he was brought to Germany, Germany, invited the OPCW experts. So it happened after, my departure from the Hague. But since there was a precedent, I suppose the same procedure was followed, and they again confirmed the findings of the German authorities on Novichok. So I think that in terms of technical capabilities, both the OPCW as well as state parties are well equipped, in fact, to identify what kind of chemical weapons were used and so on. As to the identification of perpetrators of such attacks, this goes beyond the, beyond the, I should say, authority of the organization. This belongs more to the state parties, what to do against them. And as I said, the international legal instances cannot be seized at the moment, but national courts could act, and that's what it happens. As to the more more than assassination attempts, as we mentioned, political assassination attempts, there are also organizations, terrorist organizations, which used or attempted to use. We know that ISIS used, sulfur mustard that they produced themselves in Syria. In Afghanistan, in the past, there were attempts to manufacture some chemical weapons. This might happen in the future too. So I suggest that state parties, in fact, should be alert to such threats and cooperate further. So there are different mechanisms in place and work which is going on, but I believe they are carried out in parallel, independently, and so on, and they should be coordinated. So that's something that probably either the UN should take the lead, probably, or a talk coalition of countries. But such efforts need to be coordinated to make them more effective. And this is a real threat, and this is not really something theoretical. Chemical weapons probably cannot be used in big quantities because they would be noticed because of the raw material that needs to be procured and so on. but they can be produced in small laboratories, and they can be used effectively through some delivery means. In 1995, before the convention entered into force, you may remember that there was a use of sarin in Tokyo by a cult called Aum Shinrikyo, and they produced, in fact, sarin in a lab, and 13 people were killed immediately, and thousands thought that they were exposed to sarin, and there was a huge panic. So hospitals were filled with people who ran to the emergency departments of them, and later, and at that time, the Japanese authorities, in fact, were developing the legislation based on the Chemical Weapons Convention in their country, taking them through the parliaments, so organizing themselves to implement the convention at national level and so on. And in retrospect, when they looked at again what happened in 1995, they said that if the convention was entered into force and if all mechanisms were in place, they could perhaps have prevented this incident because they could have noticed the procurement of the material by the cult in order to produce sarin. So there's no guarantee of that, of course, but being alert, being under control of supply chains and so on could help to prevent terrorist attacks.
I still wanted you to come and respond to my question about Russia. I'll ask Robert to ask those questions. Perhaps you can respond to that one.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, yeah. Robert Shaw, I direct the Export Control and Non-Proliferation Program for CNS. And thank you very much for your remarks in visiting us here today. We currently in the export control sphere are working actively in capacity building projects specific to UN Security Council Resolution 1540 implementation among a set of partner governments in Southeast Asia and then also Latin America. And there's, of course, an export and trade control focus with this work. And, what we're seeing through that effort is, the countries involved, there are various stages of 1540 implementation of trade controls. But with those states, let's say, that are at the early stages of that process, something that, that is striking, something that we've noticed is just how far along those states are with respect to CWC implementation. In many respects, this is the area where, let's say, 1540 related activities are the most active and engaged already, even if there's gaps in other areas related to kind of the broader scope of 1540. So it's just a kind of a comment that this points to success with regards to CWC implementation. And I think particularly the work of the OPCW, because there is reference to maintaining adequate sort of export-import statistics, sort of an outreach to industry. It's clear that there's activities happening in states, even if their other, let's say, export control mechanisms are more limited. So I was just curious what your thoughts were with regards to, what are the factors behind that success point? I realize it's a bit different. You had raised some concerns about national implementation with regards to some states, but this is kind of a what we're seeing is at least with this select group of countries, some success point there. Just curious what your thoughts are on the factors for that. What do you think drove these states to really sort of embrace their CWC obligations and take measures despite maybe limited resources to seriously implement the obligations.
Good. So can you remind me?
The question about Russia was, given Russia's attempts to discredit the organization,
Ukraine and so on.
and then what is the possibility of Russian withdrawal from the organization?
Yes, sorry. We received some actually veiled threats during my time, my last few years, indirectly, that Russia and some other states parties could withdraw from the convention. But it didn't happen. And I don't think, the Russian authorities, leadership, thinks that it's in the interest of their country to withdraw from such a multilateral, legal instrument and organization. Russia actually destroyed all its declared chemical weapons by October 2017. And as I mentioned, this required a lot of efforts. Initially, when, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia didn't have the necessary resources, so several Western countries did provide some both financial and technical assistance to initiate the destruction activities. And at that time, the Russian government welcomed them. And it worked in the end. They received inspectors, and everything went more or less smoothly. So until the military involvement of Russia in Syria, actually they played also a very positive constructive role in Syria, especially during the dismantlement of the Syrian chemical weapons program. By the way, the Syrian chemical weapons program was quite sophisticated, according to our experts, and it was much more, I should say, comprehensive, bold, and the Syrian, experts were able to develop some, capabilities of their own, and all this was dismantled as far as the declared ones are concerned. Same applies to Russia. And after the two incidents on Novichok users, of course, they denied any responsibility, and they denied that they had any stockpiles of such chemical weapons. And therefore, we don't know whether they have or not. So there is, of course, a mechanism which is foreseen by the convention, which is called challenge inspection. But challenge inspection was never used. And actually, that's why we had to develop the fact-finding mission and other mechanisms in Syria, because the challenge inspection mechanism can only be triggered by a state party. So the Secretariat Director General has no authority to initiate it. And it's up to the state parties, and none of them wanted to invoke it. So these suspicions will unfortunately continue. Whether the engagement of the Russians will continue, active engagement within the organization, I think it will. Looking at statements of the Russian ambassador there, I don't think they are constructive. They are helpful, but they continue to be active. So this is a more of a denial, approach, both in Syria as well as far as the two incidents are concerned. But I don't think they will withdraw. I hope not, anyhow, because 193 states parties is a big achievement, and as Jean said, this also provides us with a good precedent for other, institutions like CTBTO and hopefully biological in the future. On the 1540 transfers of dual-use chemicals and so on, it works. Maybe at the initial stage it wasn't perfect. Maybe it's not still perfect, but there is a mechanism which is in place, and the production and exports of certain chemicals are declared by state parties to the secretariat. All this needs to be kept confidential within the secretariat. They cannot be shared with other state parties. And the exports and imports are compared. Sometimes there are discrepancies which need to be resolved. This issue is still an outstanding issue, I suppose. Because you need to verify what's exported and what is imported, so that there are no leaks somewhere else. And as far as the chemical industry is concerned, I think by today there are thousands of inspections took place every year. 241 inspections are carried out by OPCW experts in different state parties. There are limits per country. 20 countries like China, India, and the United States receive 20 inspections per year because they declare more than the others. And this helps, in fact, to collect information to ensure a discipline among the industry. At the beginning, the chemical industry didn't seem to be enthusiastic, but now apparently they are used to it. And I should say that during the negotiation phase of the convention, the chemical industry was also involved. And as far as the US is concerned, actually, the ratification of the convention at the Congress was not that easy, I've been told. So there were several issues, and the main issue was to receive inspectors from an independent organization to come to the industrial sites, also because of the industrial secrecy and so on. But the chemical industry in the US was helpful, actually, was in the end supportive to the ratification of the convention at the Congress. And thanks to their support, that it was, the government, the administration was able to pass it through the Congress. But having said that, again, this mechanism needs to be improved, in my view, but also the coordination and collaboration between different, institutions and mechanisms, be it 1540 or others, must be further strengthened.
Yes, please.
How likely?
Please identify yourself.
Oh, my name is Mahnoor. I study at the Middle Grade Institute and I work here at CNS. So my question is that how likely do you think chemical weapons will be used in the future conflicts? So that's the first part of my question. And how prepared and confident OPCW, in your opinion, is in preventing and timely detecting such attacks? And what countries are of particular concern other than the ones who have already used chemical weapons?
I think for the future, North Korea, is the main source of concern as to the use of chemical weapons. The South Koreans suggest that North Korea has large stocks and the capacity to produce more. Actually, as you know, North Korea has tested nuclear weapons 6 times or 7 times, I guess. And but South Koreans seem to be more concerned about the use of chemical weapons rather than the nuclear ones. So the nuclear threat will always be there, but as to the actual use, they seem to be more concerned about these chemical weapons in warfare between the two sides, if there's an armed conflict and so on. And the OPCW, is able to detect, identify the chemical weapons technically. But in terms of prevention, of course, it will be more to the international community in general, in fact, to deter such acts. An independent organization has no power, in my view, to prevent such acts, but can only provide technical capability to identify them, and also to respond to the use. So in terms of responding, during my time, we created this additional capacity of rapid response system mission, which is composed of 15 or so experts and who could be deployed very quickly to the site of use of chemical weapons, collect samples, and bring them back and analyze them, identify the agent, and help the local authorities for decontamination and treatment of victims. So that's a mechanism which didn't exist before, but it's now in place. And so I'm sure, and we have also a situation center. I think it continues to function, especially after what happened in Ukraine, which follows the reports around the clock, and there is always one expert which looks at the news and reports that can be provided by state parties as to the allegations of use of chemical weapons. So when it's alerted, there's such an alert, then the RAM also can be quickly activated. Just a few words about Ukraine, because you will remember that there were some Russian claims that there were several laboratories in Ukraine, 4 of them, I guess, which were dealing with biological and chemical weapons and so on. And the UN also stated that these were not, laboratories for the production of biological weapons or chemical weapons, but these were, research laboratories against some, pathogens and so on, which were aimed at preventing, epidemics and so on. But this raised some questions in the minds of people, whether the Russians were actually planning some false flag attacks, especially using chemical weapons. Using chemical weapons in Syria did help the Syrian government. We know it. Because it creates some panic among the civilians, but also the armed opposition groups. So when they were when they were attacking some lands or territories occupied by the opposition groups, the Syrian armed forces, so they were, when they used chemical weapons, they were able to recapture them more easily and with much less, losses of material and soldiers. Therefore, in the battlefield, the chemical weapons did help in Syria, and a similar, approach was actually feared to happen in Ukraine. So I believe that this, concerns were not unfounded.
I have a question about universality. You mentioned particular potential incentives to Egypt and Israel to join the treaty. Could you perhaps elaborate on those? And Dr. Chen Kane, who is in Washington, our WMD director for the Middle East, may also want to weigh in on that. So.
You will be called?
Yes, please. Yes.
So the WMD free zone in the Middle East is something that Egypt has been promoting for years, actually, and the NPT revcons in the past, they failed because of just this issue, because Egypt thought that they were promised that this would be materialized, and it didn't. Since it didn't happen, then it wasn't their fault, and the promise should have been fulfilled. I served as ambassador in Syria, as John mentioned, and they have a policy of neither denial nor accepting that they have nuclear capacity, but everyone knows that they have. Israel has a nuclear capability, and from their point of view, this is a capacity which relates to their very much existence, the existence of the state, and no one believes, actually, including myself, that they would give it up, in the near future. So, in the circumstances, since Israel will not give up its nuclear capacity, and since Israel believes that Iran is aspiring to becoming a nuclear power, I don't see really any prospect of WMD free zone in the Middle East covering both, covering all kinds of WMDs, nuclear, chemical, biological, and so on. Therefore, we need to find a practical way or pragmatic approach, trying to convince both Israel and Egypt that it's in their interest to start with chemical and biological, and to start implementing, to become a part of the conventions, and to start implementing them at national level, and without, I should say, promise. I don't think anyone can give such a promise for the future. But when the political situation will be suitable in the future, perhaps WMD free zone can be materialized. But if the states in the region do stick to their position, if they don't want to make any move in the direction that I described, then I don't think there is a chance to do it. Israel will not move alone. They are a signatory to the CWC, and they participate in the in the general conferences of states parties every year. They make statements and so on, but they didn't ratify the convention, so they are not a state party. Whereas Egypt didn't even sign it, and these are important countries in the region. I believe that they should be part, especially after 193 states parties. I don't think really it can be justified that they stay away. And Egypt especially could also benefit from being a party to the convention and being a member of the OPCW. Actually, they could participate in several capacity building activities, benefit from fellowship programs and so on. So maybe some additional incentives could be provided, not by the organization, but probably by some state parties, to encourage them to take such a step. During my time, I tried to use my contacts to encourage the Israelis as well as the Egyptians. I couldn't succeed, but I think this requires a high level, a political level, in a bilateral context by major countries like the United States and others to make this an standing agenda item in their bilateral relations.
Thank you, Dr. Hen, you'd like to weigh in on this?
Sure, and I do not disagree with the gloom and doom sort of prospects of getting Israel and Egypt to join the CTBTO or the zone anytime soon. But I have a question related to that. Given the fact that countries in the region already are negotiating the zone treaty in the UN General within the UN General Assembly mandate, and the OPCW is an observer or advisor sitting in the negotiations, what do you think should be countries in the region should be aware of when they're considering how to address chemical weapons in the region? Will you advise them that the signing, ratifying the CWC will be sufficient, or you think the region will need some additional measures in order to verify compliance and addressing non-compliance as well? And a little bit related, but more broader question than only the Middle East. But it might be that the Middle East is one of the places that is the most crucial to understand that. What is your assessment about the OPCW readiness, and do they need additional measures, either as legal scope, mandate, or technical capabilities when they transition from verification of destruction of existing chemical weapon stockpile to focus more on inspection efforts on monitor and peaceful use of toxic chemicals?
It's a good question, actually. When Syria, actually was asked and pressured to become a party to the Chemical Weapons Convention and give up its chemical weapons program in 2013, I had some doubts, personally, because I thought that a country which was accused of using chemical weapons should not immediately become a equal party to the convention and equal member of the organization and so on. But the counter argument which was used to me was that when Syria would become a party, so many lives would be saved because chemical weapons would no longer be used and so on. In retrospect, again, I think that should be a transition, between the destruction of the chemical weapons program in any country and it's the full membership with all its rights and so on. It's not foreseen in the convention, but I think that could be done through a Security Council resolution. Actually, there's a resolution 2118 adopted on 27 September 2013, the same day as the Executive Council decision of the OPCW. So in such a resolution, this could be actually included, giving a period of, I should say, building trust between the country concerned and the rest of the membership, as well as the organization, which didn't happen. Now Syria, which is not only accused, but which is found responsible of the use of chemical weapons by independent investigation mechanisms, is deprived of its rights, voting and so on, by a Conference of States Parties decision. So all this could have, happened earlier. As to the Middle East, talking about Israel and Egypt membership, whether there should be some additional, measures which are not foreseen by the convention. This can be done. I think from a practical point of view, it could be done. I heard this from, some colleagues in Israel as well as in Egypt. So such a document could be developed, which would apply actually to the countries in the region, if they all agree. So it's a matter of, agreement among the states parties concerned. I don't think this should go through the OPCW decision-making organs. There is no need for that. So either it could be a bilateral agreement or a multilateral one that the countries in the region could be party. But the OPCW could help implement this such a legally binding, or probably it should be legally binding instrument through its capabilities. So through trading and through inspections and so on. I believe all this is feasible. What we need is the political will on the part of those states to be, engaged in this regime, and I think it's long overdue. I hope that they will change their mind.
Thank you. We have two more questions online. Dan, I see your hand, but first I saw Dr. Ian Stewart, the Executive Director of our CNS office in Washington. Ian, are you still online?
Yeah, I am, but you sort of went in the direction I was going to go anyway, which was Egypt and Israel. But the added piece I was going to throw into the mix was that, a few years ago, Western officials were quietly going around briefing different people, including me, on what they said was leftover chemical weapons in Egypt and also in Israel. And it's not a dynamic that I've seen kind of played out publicly to a great extent. But a few years ago, it was, an active topic of briefing from Western officials. So I was kind of going to go in that direction, but since you've just had a discussion about Egypt and Israel, I think I can table the question or pocket the question.
Thank you, Ian. Do you want to comment?
Yeah, actually, we don't know whether Egypt and Israel still possess chemical weapons, whether they had an active program in the past or still have. I don't think so, but we will not know until they become a party, and if they do, then they have the obligation, of course, to declare what they have, what they don't. And if they had an active chemical weapons program after 1945, so Israel didn't exist at that time, actually, but after 1948, let's say, for in the case of Israel. So they need to declare it, and then the organization, of course, will act accordingly.
Thank you. Dan, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, I am Dan Horner, the managing editor of the Non-Proliferation Review. Thank you for your remark, Mr. Ambassador. You made a very interesting point a minute ago about, in retrospect, how things could have been done differently with Syria. I'm wondering if there are other sort of lessons learned that you drew from that, especially you mentioned that there might be another time in the future where the OPCW has to undertake the same kind of effort. For example, there was a remarkable technical accomplishment to destroy the weapons at sea on a ship in the Syria effort, but that I don't think was anybody's first choice. But the problem was that countries were just not willing to accept the chemicals to do this destruction on land. For example, is there a way you could do that better in the future, make a more compelling case for countries to participate in that way and to accept responsibilities for destroying chemical agents taken from another country?
As I said earlier, the destruction of Syrian chemical weapons, declared Syrian chemical weapons, went quite smoothly because the state parties were very supportive of this process. More than 30 countries and the European Union provide, considerable funds. Actually, we had more money than we needed at that time, which never happens in the case of international organizations, but it happened on this. And as to the destruction on land, you're right. I mean, one country was, identified as a possible host for the destruction of the most, dangerous chemicals, but then they changed their mind, and the US has come up at that time with a fallback solution, and they installed two neutralization facilities on the cargo ship. You know it, but maybe other participants don't know. That's why I'm explaining. And they tested it. It worked. There was some concern. There were some concerns on the part of Mediterranean countries where this cargo ship would sail, and whether there could be any release into the sea. We assured them. I went to the Italian Parliament, to the Foreign Affairs Commission, to assure them that nothing similar would happen. And since the American ship couldn't go to Syria, the Norwegian ship took over, the cargo ship took over these chemicals, and they brought them to to an Italian port, where they were transferred from this cargo ship into the American one. Anyhow, the neutralization was carried out on the US cargo ship, and I think 600 tons of neutralized material were kept within the ship without any single release. Our inspectors were on board during this neutralization activity, and it happened to be probably more costly than it was foreseen, but it worked in the end. And lesser, toxic chemicals were taken to the industrial destruction facilities, which exist in different countries, and we had to pay for them, but they also effectively destroyed them. So as to the this part of the mission, I believe that of course at that time when the decision was about to be taken at the OPCW as well as at the UN, I was promoting the leadership of the OPCW, supported by the UN. The UN was promoting the UN leadership supported by the OPCW. In the end, there was a compromise to have a joint mission, and we appointed, together with the Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon, a coordinator, Mrs. Sigrid Kaag from the Netherlands, who is now Minister of Finance in the Netherlands, who was the special coordinator of this mission. And she did a good job too. And both the UN as well as the OPCW staff worked together in the field, and it did work. So in retrospect, I think, drawing on this experience, if the OPCW is involved someday, as I said, in North Korea, for instance, I think they could work efficiently and effectively based on this experience. But as to the uses of chemical weapons, this is totally a different story, and I believe that this requires a lot of efforts on the part of the organization, but also on the part of the membership to prevent them in the future.
Before I ask my last question, are there any other questions for Ambassador Uzumcu? Online, are there any? I don't see everyone. I'm sorry, please.
My name is Jennifer. I'm a summer undergraduate fellow, and I was wondering what role do you see young people playing in supporting the work of...
You asked my question.
What opportunities or initiatives are there?
Yeah. We have quite an active internship program. I don't remember the numbers. They may have increased anyhow. And we receive short-term and long-term, up to 1 year, I suppose, interns. And so far I heard, I received good feedback from them. So they found it useful. But also we encourage, in fact, the state parties to involve, students and as well as young professionals in the field, of course, in the chemical field, to be involved in our training activities, to benefit from our fellowship programs, because, as I said earlier, we need to promote the peaceful uses of chemistry. And the peaceful use of chemistry will be done by the experts in our member countries. So the OPCW is providing training, but the state parties, especially the national authorities in every state party, could make an effort to identify those who should, be participating in these programs. By the way, national authorities, which I didn't mention earlier, are authorities who are in charge of the coordination of the implementation of the convention at national level. And this changes from one country to another. It could be either the ministries of foreign affairs, ministries of defense, in a few cases, ministries of health. So some of them are very active, others less, but in some countries, they are very well organized. So it's their main responsibility, in fact, to involve more the younger generation. And I think it's important to raise awareness, at least among the younger generations, as far as the CWC, OPCW are concerned, as well as other arms control and disarmaments. So be it nuclear, biological, and so on. Because after all, they should be owned by all. So my generation lived through the negotiation of such legal instruments and their initial implementations, but they need to be owned in the future as well. So it will be the youngsters to do it.
Well, thank you, Ambassador. I mean, perfect question to end the talk, Jennifer. I was also struck that I read earlier in April there was a initiative by the organization to reach out to a younger generation of
I heard about it. You're right.
Chemical safety and security management. So
that's good.
Lots of opportunities, internships, definitely very important. If you can find a way to find an internship at the OPCW, definitely consider that. Well, since there are no further questions, Ambassador Uzumcu, I would like to thank you on behalf of CNS and the staff and the students for your excellent talk and your willingness to engage in a number of questions. And we look forward to seeing more published work from you and inviting you back to CNS.